founders would drive them crazy. Okay? There's not one thing he says that's not in the Constitution and lines up with the founders. Now, it's going to be illegal to manufacture, starting in 2009, vehicles that get under 35 miles per gallon. That truck will be illegal. This law has already been passed. It just has not taken effect yet. And maybe, you know, someone lives out in the country. I'm glad that my friend has had a truck to pull me out of the ditch when I got caught in a snowstorm. But I guess sometimes the government, they don't want you looking to anybody but them. You know, you got to. The only ones with a big engine, when that law goes into effect, are going to be whoever they've exempted from the law. I'm sure the bulletproof limousines are exempted. But for you, you can't have that freedom to choose how big an engine you want in your vehicle. Starting in 2009, the incandescent light bulb will be illegal. You're going to have those little twisty ones that have a little bit of mercury in them that send off this pale, what is that, chartreuse? Is that the color? It's a mixture of green and yellow, sort of adds a tint to the room that I find unpleasant. Okay. What about federal toilet regulations? Well, that's already been passed. See, it's already illegal to manufacture a toilet that has more than 1.6 gallons per flush. So I have to flush mine 4 times. How does that save me water? Now, you may be wondering, how is it that the government has got the money to pay for all this? You know, how can the government regulate us? I mean, the founders, they would be astounded that the federal government would tell you how big the engine in your car could be, what type of light bulbs you were permitted to illuminate your own home with, how many gallons of water do you have in your flushing toilet. I mean, it's gone so far beyond what they would ever envision that they would probably faint. The first thing they do when you told them the way things were is faint. Probably when they woke up, they'd challenge somebody to a duel. So, but how can the feds pay for the federal welfare state? How can we pay for maintaining garrisons in over 100 countries? How can they pay for regulating, micromanaging even the most minuscule details of your life? How do they pay for that? Well, they tax you for some of it, and you're probably early on in your work career, so it hasn't accumulated yet. You may not be seeing much of that yet, but there's something called Tax Freedom Day. Tax Freedom Day is the day in which the earnings for the nation's workers as a whole, not the average, but the nation as a whole, pays for government spending as a whole, on all levels. Now, 100 years ago, Tax Freedom Day for the nation was January the 19th. Americans worked, our total services, as a nation, we worked 19 days to pay all our government bills, pay for all the government we consume. Right now, it's April 30th. Varies a little bit depending on where you live because some places have higher state and local taxes. But basically, right now, 4 months of the year you work, or you will work when you do full-time jobs, just to pay for your government. The other 8 months of the year, your earnings are permitted for your own family. You know, I'm speaking of the nation as a whole, not any one individual. Okay, so that's part of how they do it. But you know what? They're spending way, way more than that. That doesn't pay for all the government they pay. They borrow the rest. Okay? In spite of the fact that only 100 years ago, we only worked 19 days as a nation to pay for all our government, and now we work for 4 out of 12 months every year. That's still not enough. They've been buying your parents' votes. And you know, they haven't been taxing for it because none of them want to raise taxes. They're afraid they'll lose an election. So you know what they do? They borrow the money. What are they using for collateral? They're using your future earnings to buy your parents' vote. It's despicable. They're going to make every one of you slaves so they can look like heroes and say, look what I gave you. Each household, currently, if you count it by conservative measure, each household owes $58,000 in government debt. Now, the Moore household does not have its $58,000, so you guys are going to have to work a little bit harder to pay your share in ours too. Okay? But that's just the most conservative measure. That's just how deep we are on the hole based on receipts of things have come in and we got to borrow money to pay for it. That doesn't count the future cost of promises they've made. In other words, they've promised to buy prescription medications for everybody, okay? But the taxes that are projected to come in for the program are going to fall well short of that. And so there's a gap there as time goes on. Here's the projected future tax revenues with the nation working 4 months a year just for them. Here's the projected cost of their promises. The real number should probably be about 5 times that. That's the future promises that are underfunded by current tax rates. So they're going to have to get it somehow. Now, according to Comptroller General David Walker, and luckily, once you get this job, they can't fire you for 15 years, I believe it is, because he's been telling people what some folks don't want to hear. It's the real inconvenient truth. He said, there's no way we can sustain what we're doing. The real number is probably of underfunded promises more than $50 trillion. 6 years ago, it was $20 trillion. So they more than doubled the amount of underfunded promises just in the last 6 years. No one can do that. No one can keep borrowing and promising to pay more than they make in an exponential rate year after year. And they get mad when you mention this, but there's not only is there all kinds of taxes directly on you, but there's also an indirect tax. They're destroying the dollar. Because what they've done is they've borrowed a bunch of money with dollars that are this big, and they want to pay them back with dollars that are that big. Now, never mind that your salary is tied to those dollars. Many people's savings are tied to those dollars. When I was a child, I know I probably seem old to you, but it wasn't that long ago. Someone asked me, what could you buy with a penny? I told them, you know what, you can buy a piece of bubble gum with a penny. Today, a piece of bubble gum is 5 cents. So in terms of bubble gum, the purchasing power of the dollar has lost 80% in my lifetime. And just as our unfunded promises are accelerating, the decline of the dollar is accelerating. See? You know, oil was $20, $25 a gallon at the start of the current administration. Now it's $100 a gallon. But it's not just oil. Copper, cement, food, everything's going up. These things aren't going up, the dollar's going down. They're just printing more. And the more they print, the less each dollar in your pocket is worth. Because they're spreading our nation's resources thin. Who's the only one who's been talking about this? Ron Paul. He wants an honest dollar that the government cannot fudge. A dollar backed by something real. This is Germany, 1930. This is a picture of a woman. She's cold. So what she's doing is she's feeding her furnace with rifle marks. Because Germany, see, he's not making this up. He's just looking at history books. Every time a country has done what we're doing, something like this has been the result. The currency got so worthless that people they had to go to a grocery store with a wheelbarrow full of money to bring home 1 sack of groceries. She's burning this money because it's so worthless, you couldn't buy as much firewood with it. They would have a 1,000,000 mark note. They couldn't even afford to print new bills. They would just send a stamp that you're supposed to paste over it to turn a 1,000,000 mark note into a 1,000,000,000 mark note. That's how fast their money got destroyed. We've been able to get away with things for a long time because we have been the world's reserve currency. But now, the other countries are starting to catch on to the con. And nobody wants to be caught holding those dollars. Okay. Who's your dad? Finally, I'm getting start talking a little bit about Ron Paul. Ron Paul has never voted to raise taxes. You know, but you said, well, there's a lot of people who don't vote to raise taxes, but they vote to spend. I don't know which one is more immoral, taxing and spending or borrowing and spending. Well, he hasn't voted to borrow and spend either. He's never voted for an unbalanced budget. He's never voted to raise his own pay. He's never voted to increase the power of the executive branch. He doesn't even participate in their lucrative pension system. They've got Social Security for everybody else, and they've got a special retirement plan for them. He's like, no, that's not right. You're going to care a lot more about how Social Security does if you are in it